Hello and welcome. I'm Katie von Holzen, IASCL's Media Coordinator. I have with me today Dr. Rebecca Defina, who is a DECRA Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne, School of Languages and Linguistics, which means they received a prestigious Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Research Award. They received their PhD in 2016 from the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, where their dissertation examined serial verb constructions in Abatiime, a Kwa language spoken in Ghana. Their pioneering work on the acquisition of Pitjantjatjara, a Pama-Nyungan language spoken in Central Australia, has contributed a corpus of child and adult-directed speech from children as young as 10 months and as old as 10 years. They also played an integral role in the development of the framework and manual of the Acquisition Sketch Project, which we will talk about in a moment. In their current research, they are examining how Pitjantjatjara and English-speaking children learn to think and talk about events. Starting this year, they will become a lecturer in the linguistics department at the University of Melbourne. So congratulations for that. Rebecca, welcome. It's so nice to have you with me today. So I'll kind of maybe start out at the beginning, but asking you a little bit about your specific flavor that you put on your research. So what led you to become interested in child language acquisition, especially the study of understudied and indigenous languages and indigenous peoples?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me here today. And yeah, generally for these questions and interviews, I'm curious. I'm excited to talk about it all. So I actually came to working on understudied and indigenous languages before I came to working on child language acquisition. So I come from a language documentation and description background. So there was always this kind of inherent focus on those types of languages. And I was drawn into that work largely due to the focus on it where I did my undergraduate training in linguistics at the University of Sydney. But I just really loved the work of uncovering the patterns and learning these little details about how languages worked and using this knowledge to be able to help language communities to build different resources. So I've worked on dictionary projects and helping languages. So when I started working with Abatiime, they were just starting to develop an orthography. And so we were having lots of conversations about how they should write their language, and it's able to bring in this information that we were finding out about how the phonology of their language worked to those conversations and give them that information so while they tried to make those decisions. And that was fabulous. And it was during my PhD work on Abatiime, which was still quite kind of descriptive and documentation based and adult focused, that I developed this interest in child language. And part of that was because it wasn't entirely adult focused due to various practical reasons. I ended up having to work with teenagers a lot. So I was working with kind of 12 to 18-year-olds a lot. So I was working in schools with teenagers. And then I just became really interested, particularly towards the end of my PhD, into, well, how would these things that I'm finding in the more adult language, how would they be developed? How did they come about in these speakers? And the questions around this kind of trajectory of acquisition and how that could provide a window into the how of various linguistic phenomena. And that's what really fascinated me about language acquisition and got me looking at that.
Wow. So that I have to say of all of my interviews, most people start off with the child part and then add something else, another twist on top of it.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to hear how you kind of came from the documentation side and then became more and more interested in children. I'm glad that only the teenagers were available to you, so that you actually had the opportunity to develop this interest. And I think the field is better for it. I've been talking and working with Shanley Allen, who's currently IASCL's president. And back in 2023, I talked to her about the launch of the Acquisition Sketch Project. And no surprise, along with Shanley, you and Lucy Davidson, Birgit Helwig, Barbara Kelly, and Evan Kidd were integral in putting together this framework. So briefly, for those, check out the Shanley Allen interview that I have here on YouTube. But the Acquisition Sketch Project provides child language researchers with a guide to collecting, analyzing, and documenting child and child-directed language data and socialization practices from understudied languages. So a really great resource, probably one you hoped you would have had over a decade ago. And over the last few years, the project has held regular meetings to walk users through this manual. And you also recently presented your own acquisition sketch of Pitjantjatjara. So please tell us about your work, your longitudinal work, and how your own experience informed the procedures that you helped put down into the acquisition sketch project.
Well, you're absolutely right. Throughout the whole process, it felt like I was working on the manual that I wish I'd had. And in a way, there were a couple of us, so Birgit and myself, and to a lesser extent Lucy, have come more from the documentation side into language acquisition, and we wanted the manual to be accessible to people in that position who were coming from documentation but had an interest in studying language acquisition. And so one of our roles was to kind of, when you learn more about something, you forget what you didn't know. And we were closer to that position of not having known and having that kind of insight on what we'd wished that we had known. So that was certainly part of our role in the process. But so I came into the acquisition sketch project through my work with CODAL. So it's called the Australian Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language, which was this huge multi-university project through a lot of Australia, which ran for 7 years and has now finished, unfortunately. But one of their major goals was to develop a corpus and study of the acquisition of an Australian Indigenous language. And I was lucky enough to get that role to do that work, which got me back working with Australian languages, and also this opportunity to really explore and get into working on child language, which was really exciting. It was also then because we had a few of us who were coming into child language work, and generally there was suddenly this group of enough of us who had this strong interest in language acquisition work in under-resourced languages. And so Barb Kelly and Evan Kidd and Birgit Helwig and Shanley Allen had at various times wanted to work on such a manual, but it had never really gotten off the ground. But through this project, we had enough of us who were driving it and wanting to work on it. And we were lucky enough to get a grant supporting German and Australian collaboration to fund several of our meetings to then kind of move this project on and get us going with it. We ran a series of workshops in Australia and in Germany, and through those conversations built this manual. So it was all incredibly serendipitous and an amazing experience. Um, Being a part of the project hugely informed my developing understanding of child language research. And the work that I was doing with Pitjantjatjara, it was kind of, as we were writing the manual, it was like, okay, now I can follow these methods in my own corpus. But also the issues that I was running into in developing the Pitjantjatjara corpus were then informing the manual. It was this kind of cyclic process. And the same was happening with Lucy working on Murraypata and Birgit working on Coquette and so on all of us. So it was great to have these kind of in progress sketches as we were going to be kind of churning through this cyclic process. Ways that it kind of more specifically influenced the manual. Probably the recording schedule. So we were initially suggesting a stricter once every 6 months the same kids system, and due to the largely nomadic lifestyle of a lot of Pitjantjatjara people, I was finding that when I went back to the community, the kids that I'd recorded last time were no longer there. And so I wasn't able to maintain that consistency across sessions. And so we developed this kind of cross-lagged approach, which then ended up working for a lot of other people as well. So that was one of the things that really impacted the manual. A lot of work went into, both from Lucy and my, kind of transcription methods, things that we found worked well for transcription. And Pitjantjatjara became a real kind of poster child for the importance of gesture, because in the Pitjantjatjara community there is an alternate sign language in use in the community as well. And so gesture is hugely important to look at in terms of the child's language acquisition, because you've got this whole other modality and language that's being used in the community, which is gestural and or manual. And so if you're not looking at that, you're going to be missing a lot. So it was one of the, no, we have to include gesture. Yeah.
Okay, super interesting. So just picking up on that gesture part at the end, is it like spoken signs and then plus gesture will mean something different than a different gesture, or is it like accompanying, or how does it like is it complementary, or is it actually
Yeah,
gives just out of curiosity?
it's more complementary. It's more like
Okay.
code switching.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So people will switch into sign, particularly if they want to be more discreet, or if there's certain avoidance or taboo restrictions, they can slip
Okay.
into sign instead. It's also very useful for communicating at larger distance. So if you're not wanting to be yelling across the way, then you can sign.
Okay.
And those are the kind of the main things, but often there'll be like a spoken utterance and then a signed word kind of along there, which
Okay. So it's
yeah,
really about kind of really designing for the moment and to your
yeah,
audiences and also
it's all about the affordances of the particular
yeah.
situation.
And what you were saying about the development of the sketch projects, I think it's no surprise that to me that it took such a huge effort to develop something like this.
Mm.
And it's actually really also serendipitous that it was many different people working on projects at the same time. And so you had kind of somebody to bounce ideas off of. But I also
Exactly.
think it's really interesting to hear about this, the initial desire to test every 6 months and then realizing that is just not feasible. I think that we need to have these kinds of experiences, right? It's this this budding up of kind of what we think is, best scientific practice, and then there's the real world, right?
Yeah,
So if we want to be able to do anything at all, we need to be able to adapt to the particular situation. And I think that's what I really like about the acquisition sketch project, because it's really thought through. All right, you are going into a challenging situation, right? Just from the nature of, we're outside of the lab. Um, we're going into people's homes and very private communities. And so I think that having a lot of people with a lot of experience on this, kind of giving those guidelines, are just incredibly valuable.
absolutely. And that's exactly what particularly our early workshops were like. We had a lot of fabulous child language experts, Elena Leven and Sabina Stoll, and um, coming in and giving excellent advice. But there was this really clear tension at the beginning between this um, more gold standard, idealistic, this is what you should be aiming for, this is what would be good, and then a group of field linguists who are going, actually, I can't do that. and it was this, but we want this, but it doesn't work. We want this, it doesn't work. And this negotiation, I remember we had this, it was kind of towards the end of the first day, this negotiation of, well, how many hours should we be aiming for the corpus? And this tension between more of it, which would yield, better research, more data, versus practicality of data collection, and where is this sweet spot of the trade-off.
Absolutely. Wow. That's probably one of those kinds of meetings that will go down and people will talk about decades from now. Wow, it's so cool to have that happening during
Yeah.
our lifetime. So considering this, what kind of reception have you seen in the field for the framework for the project?
Yeah, it's just been fabulous. Like we've all been blown away by it and really pleased. There was certainly a nervousness. Like we hoped that it would go really well, but a nervousness about would people accept it? Would people say, "Oh no, that's not enough data. That's not um, it's not good enough. It's not going to yield anything worthwhile for writing a description." But the reception has been fabulous. And we've, as you said before, we've been running these monthly seminars, first discussing the various topics of the sketch manual, but since late last year, shifting to discussing sketches in progress. And the response to that has just been incredible and very telling. So as soon as we suggested this, we immediately had 10 volunteers from outside of our group who wanted to discuss in progress sketches on languages across Africa, Europe, Asia, Oceania, and South America. And others have been coming in since. And it's so good. Like our main goal for this project was to support people to do acquisition studies where it had seemed prohibitive or not possible, and to have people using it and finding it helpful and it enabling them to describe the acquisition of these 10 plus other languages where we didn't know anything about them before is just, it's brilliant and exactly what we hoped. So
Wow, that's wonderful. Congratulations. I'm also wondering or thinking, having this kind of professionally recognized framework probably also helps people get grant funding, right? And
Yes.
not just,
Yeah.
I'm writing a grant and I'm like, oh, I'll do all of these things. No, I am going to follow this accepted in the field framework. It says that this is enough,
Yeah.
right? You kind of bypass this
Yeah.
tension, right? And
Yeah. It provides this legitimacy.
yes,
Yeah. This
exactly.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now that the acquisition sketch project is gaining momentum, right? You guys are seeing recognition in the field. What do you see for the future of the project? What kind of developments or improvements would you like to make?
Yeah. Um, well, we're just really excited about how it's getting picked up, and exactly as you were saying, that it's kind of providing this support or legitimacy for people to apply for grants. It's becoming a thing um, that people can refer to, and a scaffold that people can work around. And so one element of this is it kind of brings people together. So the MPI for Psycholinguistics is planning a special session on acquisition sketches at the Many Paths to Language conference in October this year. And we just love that it's becoming this banner to bring people together and to do this work. And would love to see that continue, for it to become this framing under which people can be supported to do this work and to discuss it together. And other than that, there's a lot of us who haven't finished our own sketches, myself included. And so we're just really looking forward to actually finishing our own sketches. But also, there's a huge amount of excitement in the team about what we can do once we have more sketches completed, and the possibilities and the opportunities that opens up for comparative work. And so we've done a little taste of this in a recent paper published in the special issue of the Australian Journal of Linguistics. It's dedicated to Barb Kelly, where we were looking at child-directed language across the sketches that we have enough work on for that to proceed. And we'd love to just see more of that. There's so many questions that we were coming up with throughout the process of, we could look at this little thing in, if we had 10 sketches, 20 sketches, we could look at this across languages, and it just offers this incredible opportunity of more comparative corpora across more varied languages to do exciting work. We're also really excited to be building, again, this kind of network of people doing this sort of work. And there seems to be this kind of this real, I don't know, I guess it's come in waves over the years, but there's this surge of people doing this sort of work at the moment. So there was us doing the acquisition sketch, but there was also Marissa Casillas doing the workshop on expanding research in language development, and there's been various other programs and projects looking to support people doing language acquisition work in lesser studied languages. And it's wonderful to see that building. Similarly, so IASCL's put together a Zotero group collecting together research on the acquisition of underrepresented languages, the IASCL research papers on underrepresented languages. And just to have all these kind of building resources and networks is really good. And we'd love to continue that and work on making more resources available. Barb Kelly, one of her big wishes for the project was to create a kind of acquisition of underrepresented languages resource hub, to have a kind of place where people could go and get various resources that would help them in their work. And we'd love to be able to realize that.
So this, so kind of talking about how it isn't just within the acquisition sketch project, but it's kind of, this is more of a global realization that this kind of work is very important. I have to say that, so Shanley Allen is the president of IASCL right now, and this is her main priority, is making these kinds of things possible. So the repository was her idea. We've seen incredible growth in it already, just within a few months, and I think that there's going to be a couple more things coming down the pipeline. So getting more focused on your own research, your current work focuses on the development of event segmentation in language and cognition in Pitjantjatjara and English-speaking children. So please tell us more about this project. I don't know a lot about event segmentation, so what kind of data are you collecting and what have you found so far?
Yep. So event segmentation is all about how people divide up experience, their just normal daily experience, into individual events. So this interview that we're having now, or just making a cup of tea, or getting ready for work, or the normal day-to-day stuff of your life, how you divide it up into units. And it's actually hugely important cognitively. It impacts how people remember things, how they process, how they plan. And there's been a lot of research into both the cognitive and linguistic event segmentation. But there's relatively little looking at the intersection between them and the potential relationships between cognitive and linguistic event segmentation. But there's a few things which suggest that there could be a lot of relationship between the two. So cross-linguistically, event segmentation is hugely variable. So Nick Evans has said that it might be the most linguistically variable semantic domain. Cognitive event segmentation research also suggests that people are likely quite influenced by what they call their event model, which is their idea of what type of event is happening. But the event model, or your idea of what type of event this is, may well be influenced by how events are lexicalized in the language that you're speaking. And so there's this kind of hint or suggestion that there might be some relationship. And in my PhD work, I was looking at this for older people, 12 and up, and indeed found some correlations between how Avatime Dutch and English speakers segment events linguistically and cognitively. And so in this current work, I'm exploring how such potential relationships might develop through childhood. And because there's questions around, well, is it a more cognitively based general event segmentation, which then informs the linguistic segmentation, or do they develop in tandem, or how does this relationship come about? What's going on? And so I'm collecting both linguistic descriptions and non-linguistic event segmentations from Pitjantjatjara and English-speaking people from the age of 3 up to 11, cutting off at 12 where I was doing the PhD work, amusingly enough, and then also adults. Unfortunately, the project has been quite delayed, and so we're just starting to collect the data now. So I don't have anything to say about what we found, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what we do find.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it too. It sounds like that kind of a project has the potential to say a lot about linguistic and developmental theories. So very, very cool stuff. So I wish you luck now that it's launching. Much data I wish for you.
Thank you. And even because there'll be a lot of a parallel corpus of stories, essentially, from these children. So it's collecting these little prompted, elicited narratives, these event descriptions. And So that will be useful for so many things.
Definitely. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing about collecting this kind of corpus data. You may have some specific research question, but it actually can give other researchers a lot of extra mileage through kind of secondary research questions and things like that. It's just a never-ending resource. Um, so a bit related to this, you are studying rather specialized populations, not just children. Children are specialized, I think, enough to give anybody enough to think about, but you're studying children growing up in indigenous communities, learning languages, which are generally understudied, not even, well studied in adulthood. So it's very important to maintain relationships with these communities. So what do you think is, keeping that in mind, what's important to think about when working with these communities?
Underrepresented, often exoticized languages or linguistic groups. The main important thing is respect and autonomy and just it's really basic, but having this central tenet of respect of the person as a human being and valuing their thoughts and honoring their interests and wishes and your commitment to them. It's very basic but important stuff. And unfortunately, I guess that's where I've seen most issues in research with understudied populations, is where that might not be done so well, where the research is a bit more extractive rather than mutually beneficial, or one-sided in its design and implementation. And so I think it's just so important to communicate with people so that they understand the research and the reasons for why you're wanting to carry it out, and that they have the opportunity to communicate their own ideas and thoughts and wishes for that research, and for you to take those thoughts seriously. And very often there are, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the kind of the practical limitations of doing work in communities that might be further away from the lab or the university and so on, is very often there are issues or priorities that an outsider researcher will be completely unaware of. And it's so important that the community members are supported to tell you about those so that you can address them before you crash into them, hopefully. And people are so much more likely to communicate where the researchers take the time to build real and lasting relationships. And, it's not the sort of work where you can just fly in, run your study and leave. You have to return repeatedly and follow through on what you say you're going to do, and really take the time to listen and allow space for people to communicate. And there's just so many brilliant people in these communities, and it's a shame if they're not given that voice, and it's a great honor to work with them.
Yeah, I think that's a point that actually hasn't come up when I've discussed with other researchers previously. Not just making sure that you listen, but that you develop a relationship where both sides feel comfortable talking about their needs. I think
Yeah,
that's step number one.
yeah,
And yeah, not just flying in literally and getting what you want and getting back out. I think about on a much less intense scale, collecting data in daycares.
yeah,
I couldn't just show up and grab a kid and take them into, my testing room. It was wonderful. I got to play with them for hours. They, got used to me, and then I could offer that we would do something. And that was more at the level of child-to-child negotiation, but
Yeah.
making sure that the environment that you provide is mutually beneficial comes first from establishing that relationship. And I think back to, I think this is something you did during your PhD with, was it Avatime, or where you
Yeah.
helped them develop the orthography? I mean,
Yeah.
that's something where, as a linguist, you can very specifically give back, and that. Well, I mean, it's very mutually beneficial for us to have this kind of
Yes,
understanding,
they
but
did.
I'm,
They did all the work. I just kind of came in and gave some ideas. They went on and developed the orthography.
even so, those are kinds of ways where, not only where we can really, I think, probably lend our expertise and things like that. So, obviously, important to establish these kinds of relationships. So, maybe in that or beyond that, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way while working with and studying children, learning Pitjantjatjara or Avatime or one of these different languages that you've studied?
Yeah, I guess one of the big things has been just really slowing down and taking that time. And that has progressed through all my work, I guess. So starting with Evertime, and I went there for quite a long time at first, but I arrived with the idea of, okay, I'm here, I'm going to work on the language, um, through to working on Pitjantjatjara, where it was very clear that that was not going to happen and that there needed to be an initial trip, which was very much just getting to know you, and then we'll start work later. And then working with children is even more, as you're saying, it's you need to develop that relationship and take that time. And so it's been a lot about patience and learning to take that time. Yeah. Um, Other things that I've learned, as particularly with the Pitjantjatjara, so I know a lot of people who do similar work around the world have had great success doing remote field work, um, or being able to call families up on the phone and discuss issues, and or do Zoom calls and do things like that. And I've tried that several times, and it's never been at all successful. And so just learning that, at least in this context, I need to accept that it has to be face to face or not. And and that's been a learning thing.
I I think probably it's good to see what works for everybody else and have a variety of options, and then also know your mileage may vary. It depends on the particular community, but it's good to have like, okay, here are my constraints, here are my options, and you also have to try and probably fail a few times. And I'm also thinking, you were saying about it's important to have time. I think about our very rushed scientific community, right? Publish, publish, publish. This is super important. And I also wonder, I'm sure that, so as somebody who knows an embarrassingly bare minimum about language documentation, I'm sure that this has been a topic in the community for a very long time. But I think about things like the acquisition sketch project where, it's laid down, this is how long it takes. If we
Yeah.
want this kind of very valuable data, we need to hire people for the contracts that have this length. We need to have, more realistic, not, I'll collect everything in 6 months. It maybe will help, funding agencies understand the worth, first of all, of this kind of research, but also the investment that it takes to be able to get to those results. One can hope.
And I was incredibly lucky that this project, my work, kind of started in an environment that really understood that and valued it and offered that opportunity to have a long-term position and do that work. It wouldn't have happened without a similar grant project that offered that.
Yeah. So I teach a seminar on first language acquisition, and sometimes I will play these interviews for my students. So, what do you think is the most important message for students enrolled in such a language acquisition course? What's the most important message that they should get today?
Yeah. So I like this question. I've been asked it in various ways at various times. I think the one that really stands out to me was I gave a talk to Dutch high school students about linguistics, and I hear what's the most important thing in linguistics that they should know about. And my answer is the same. And it's, I think, an appreciation for diversity, and in particular for language acquisition, about how children are able to learn language in amongst all this diversity, and to appreciate that and feel the wonder and curiosity for that, and how it opens up all these incredible questions in language acquisition, but also gets students to question their assumptions about how children learn language, based on the way that they've learned or how they've seen children learn their own culture, their own language, and how things are done there, and have this glimpse of wonder at the marvel of child language acquisition on a global scale, and how children are able to learn all of their languages despite all the variation in structures, modalities, and contexts of acquisition.
So IASCL 2027 will be held in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the first time that the Congress will be held in South America. So we are very excited about this. And I think that this reflects a move in the field, as well as, we highlighted Shanley Allen's priorities in recognizing researchers in regions that are often understudied. This has also been a bit of a theme in this little interview of ours. They're often underserved in the field of child language, but they contribute mightily towards its advancement, right? So, as someone whose research includes these understudied languages, what are ways that we, especially those, for example, me, sitting here comfortably in Western Europe, what are the ways that we as a field can provide better support?
Yeah. So it's so good that it's going to Brazil next year. So many excellent South American researchers. So it's so good that it's more accessible for them. We mentioned it earlier in terms of grants, and a big limitation, of course, for so many is often money and funding opportunities. It's an obvious one, but it comes up repeatedly, and it's more of an issue for people in lesser resourced areas, who then have to travel further to get to conferences. So any support that's available for that, e.g. grants specifically targeted for people who are further afield, or working on understudied languages, or coming from under-resourced languages themselves, to be able to attend these workshops is awesome. And I mentioned it earlier, so like Marissa's course, the World course, this online course which was available to people all over the world, was utterly fabulous. It's a fantastic way to support researchers around the world to learn and do this work. And so things like that Awesome. Um, Translations. So there's, obviously like the sketch manual and many other things are published in English, but to provide translations of major works into Spanish and other regional languages would be really helpful. It's something we'd like to do for the manual, but haven't managed to get around to working on yet. And but I think, all of those are kind of more systemic institutional things that institutions can do. But in terms of and institutions can impact this next one as well. But in terms of kind of on the ground individual, what can a person do as a more privileged first world language acquisition researcher, is making conferences more welcoming and accessible to people from underrepresented communities. So just trying to have more time, be more tolerant, respectful, and not expect people to know, all these things necessarily, and having that open mind and respectful approach, and trying to make these venues as welcoming as possible, because there's this whole it's a cultural institution, an academic conference, and if you've been to them, you know how they work and you're familiar with them and so on. But if they're new and different, then they can be intimidating. And so it's all just about trying to reduce that intimidation as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about IASCL 2024 in Prague, and it was huge. There were over 700 attendees. It was at times quite overwhelming for me, and
Yeah.
I have over a decade of experience. And so I think that that's a great way to think about it. How we are all, no matter where we're from in the world, we have different academic cultures, and those are going to have similarities and differences every time we get together. If I can add one more thing that I think is super helpful that the Acquisition Sketch Project is already doing, and that is recording your meetings, especially for those, your meetings are in English, especially for those who don't, who have English proficiency, but maybe just need a little bit more time. Having those recordings afterwards where you can pause and, okay, I understood that, and then keep going. Those can also be a super valuable way of supporting everyone.
Absolutely. And then just let me plug, I know a lot of non-native English speakers who beg me to tell people to use microphones. Even if you think, oh no, I can project, I can speak loud enough, it's fine. It makes a huge difference to the understandability, particularly for non-native speakers. And then if it's
For native
recorded,
speakers too, by the way,
exactly.
as I'm hitting middle age, more and more, I need that too.
Absolutely. And the other benefit of recorded sessions is captions.
Yeah.
Hugely helpful to be able to have that just as a second input to aid
Yeah.
interpretation.
I, AI, we don't have to go into that, but that has a lot of potential for providing this kind of support,
Exactly.
either live or afterwards. Although I have to say, my YouTube subtitles on these interviews are usually pretty subpar. Um, all right, so I want to wrap up with an accolade for you a little bit. So in 2024 at the um, In 2024, the IASCL introduced their inaugural Early Career Researcher Award. The winner was Rowena Garcia, who also is completing an acquisition sketch project. But you also received a commendation. So I usually wrap up interviews with senior scientists, asking them to give advice to early career researchers. This time, considering that you've been recognized for your work as an early career researcher, I wanted to ask your advice for senior scientists. What do you think that they can do to better support early career researchers?
Yeah, thank you. Well, firstly, just taking these opportunities to lift them up. I'm very grateful to IASCL for offering this inaugural award, but also to the wonderful people who nominated me for it. So just taking the time to nominate people for things such as this, to offer them opportunities, to work with them, just invite them to give talks, do this interview. All of this is fabulous. But really, I think the most important thing is the time, the relationships that people put the effort in to build. And I've benefited hugely from mentors who've given me their time to have a cup of tea, a chat about things, and just develop that relationship so that I've felt really comfortable to be able to go to them with questions, and also just these informal opportunities to talk were where I gained the most of this kind of previously unspoken knowledge that I didn't even know I didn't know as a researcher coming into the field or starting out. I wouldn't have known to ask questions about blah, but then to be in those rooms, to just be having those chats, it's like, oh, okay, now I can learn about that and then ask those questions.
Hmm.
So,
So being generous with your time, but also in kind of sharing your network or just giving early career researchers kind of a place in the room to share in that experience, and also I'm sure contribute as well,
yeah,
which is a very good confidence building activity.
absolutely.
Well, obvious why you received a commendation for this Early Career Researcher Award. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited about your work on event segmentation. I wish you all the luck in the project and just in general. Also, congratulations again on becoming a lecturer in linguistics at the
Thank you.
University of Melbourne. And, maybe see you in Sao Paulo or somewhere else in the world.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for the interview, this opportunity to have this conversation. It's been wonderful.
Likewise.